we all want to look good. Yes, the diet and the lifestyle is a huge part of this, right? But the stimulus to build muscle and the stimulus to lose body fat and the stimulus to lose weight by burning calories has to come from training. All right, what is up? Episode 23 of Pursuit of Balance. We are going to talk about the three cornerstones of what I think every fitness program should strive to be and how we can best balance this out as far as longevity goes, functionality goes. I've been kind of going through, I wouldn't say a little bit, I would say a decent transition with my training lately, and a lot of it is actually influenced by just me getting my blood work done. I've been tracking Whoop a little bit more religiously. And, last week I talked about like you can't hack what you don't track and how measurables are just going to be one of those things from, accountability perspective and awareness perspective. But, I always say that awareness without, execution is generally going to lead to anxiety for a lot of people. So like using whatever data we're, tracking to then move forward and make those changes. So one of the changes that I've been going through, and this is something I talk a lot about on kind of the front end and what I wanted to share with you guys is, I've noticed that on the cardiovascular kind of aerobic side of training that I've kind of neglected it. And I think a lot of people even that are doing it are not executing it correctly, right? As far as getting the full benefit and the best ROI for your time on what you're dedicating to your training, right? So to kind of come back to these three cornerstones, the three things that I always talk about that I think most people get into fitness or join a gym or work with a trainer or whatever it might be is number one, health, right? I think, especially as we get older, this tends to move up to the top of the list as far as priorities go because, we want to live a long time and it's not just extending lifespan, but also health span, right? So that could be feeling better, that could be more energy, that could be sleeping better, that could be, reducing resting heart rate, that could be whatever it might be for you. But I think at the end of the day, when we think about health, I think it's ideally how we feel day to day. And most importantly, like, doing our best to remove illness and fight disease later in life so we can live a long time as well. So that's number one. Number two is going to be aesthetics. I think this, I will say as far as internal motivation for a lot of us, how we look tends to be a really, really big driver of why we choose to do fitness, right? Why we lift weights, why we go on runs, things like that. There's like a huge influence to how we look, right? Because I think in relationship to kind of the feeling part of it again, we like to feel confident, right? And I think feeling confident comes from just like following up the work and the action that you're taking all the time, but more importantly is like the results and the outcome that it's providing. And I will say that for me personally, that's always been kind of at the top of the list until I started getting older and then the health started creeping up more and more. And then the third one is going to be performance, right? So performance is like how strong we are or how fast we are or our aerobic capacity or our mobility or whatever that might be. And I kind of went through a journey myself inside of fitness where I started off with, I started working out with my parents was kind of when I first started getting into the gym in high school. And both my parents kind of had, your typical kind of bodybuilding approach where it's like, hey, we're doing a push day. So today's chest and tries. This day is back and buys. We're doing legs this day. So you kind of your typical PPL kind of split. And it was always geared around looking good, right? As my dad said, he's like, hey, you want to think about your body like a statue and you're sculpting away and shaping your body to aesthetically look the way you want it to look. And the one thing that I've always appreciated about bodybuilding is understanding that genetically some of us are built different, right? Like, so for me, it's like I always had to put way more effort towards my legs. I always had to put more effort towards my chest and my upper chest. I always had to put a little bit more effort towards my arms and not necessarily my shoulders. So when you think about like sculpting this body that you want to, desire to achieve or look like, that is the idea of bodybuilding, right? So it's not just building to get muscle everywhere. And I think where a lot of people screw this up is also doubling down on what they're genetically, gifted with or just good with, right? So I think like finding the balance of all those things was super important. Over time, I started, I grew up reading the Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Muscle and Fitness magazine, and following kind of the bodybuilding is really what got me into the fitness industry. And I think from a longevity perspective and a performance perspective, it's obviously very neglected. And the unfortunate part, and I will say this is probably a lot of just like hormone abuse and anabolics that have to do with this, but like, you see all these bodybuilders dying at such a young age, and to that extreme of a level of fitness or a level of muscle building, there is unfortunately going to be things that suffer as far as long-term health goes, right? So when I started to get out of the bodybuilding kind of approach, I mean, the thing that really I would say kind of transitioned me a little bit is when I started kind of doing CrossFit, right? So 19 years old, I started kind of getting into a little bit of CrossFit and I was super attracted to it, honestly, because I loved the group aspect. I loved the community aspect. I was playing team sports pretty much my entire life when I was in sports. So I loved kind of that competitive atmosphere of working out against other people. But really what the thing that I think attracted me the most to it was this idea that like CrossFit was this, we're not great at one thing, we're good at a lot, right? And it's still a philosophy that I carry to today. I kind of manipulated a little bit on kind of the intention and longevity side of it there's some things once again that I disagree with CrossFit as far as that goes. But I really, I love the performance of like, okay, like let's not just be strong. Let's not just be fast as a sprint. Let's also be able to run, a long distance if we need to. Let's also be able to row. Let's also be able to do gymnastics, so I think this kind of balancing act of like how we move and how we perform was something I was super attracted to. Now, the thing with CrossFit is it wasn't not necessarily built around how you look at all, right? So it doesn't matter aesthetically how you look. That's not going to do anything for ranking. So it's just based off of your performance. Now, once again, when we think about this relationship to health, longevity, lifespan, health span, I think there's also going to be a sacrifice when you think about being at the top of the list of performance, right? Because just like any other athlete in any other sport, you are sacrificing long-term health to be the best you can possibly be, right? To be the fastest, to be the strongest, to be, the best at your position in sport, like whatever that might be. So I think from an athletic kind of mindset, performance is the thing that we're chasing. But, when you look at a normal career for an athlete, it's like once someone gets out of school or college, 95+% of us, probably even 98% of us, really never really get into a consistent habit of keeping that or even making it an important part of our lives anymore necessarily, right? And I think a lot of us go through this little lost puppy phase of like the dynamic of losing that. But if you want to be really, really good, you want to be the best quarterback in the NFL, you want to be the best at, CrossFitter like I'm talking about, like there's going to be a level of sacrifice on health. Now, that being said, both with the bodybuilding example for aesthetics and both with the CrossFit example or sport example for an athlete, there's obviously a natural byproduct where you're probably going to be ahead of most people in general population. So no matter what, even though you're quote unquote sacrificing kind of long-term health and longevity, you are still getting a byproduct of someone that's exercising, someone that's building lean body mass, someone that's keeping body fat at a pretty low level, someone that's, improving their VO2 max, someone that's improving their cardiovascular metrics, things like that. So I think those things do obviously carry over to health, but I think to the extreme of how you're kind of treating it or viewing it or kind of programming it is going to be the thing that's going to dictate what that's going to do to the health in the long-term future, right? And then, like I said, the health kind of tying it in. So for me, I've always just like, okay, aesthetics were always important to me. And then I kind of carried over to performance in CrossFit. And I would say, honestly, if I were to even look farther back in life, I think performance was more important than aesthetics because at a young age, before I started getting into the gym workouts, it's like I was playing sports for, 10, 12 years prior to that. And that was all about performance. It wasn't like, oh, how do I look for lacrosse? How do I look for football? How do I look for baseball? It was just like, how do I play? Right. And it was just mastering the skill, right? It was getting a little bit faster. It was getting more coordinated. It was getting stronger in certain positions, right? So even though I didn't have dedicated like strength and conditioning necessarily or dedicated time in the gym, which I wish I kind of started a little bit earlier, but whatever, that was always a performance thing, right? So as I started to get older, I would say it's like the mid-20s when I, dealt my back injury and I kind of was dealing with that for a few years and I had a knee injury. Then I just had like couple things in life, right? It was just like losing my uncle, lost a best friend, like just things with like health and just like, I think awakening moments in life that a lot of us deal with that kind of change your perspective of like, okay, like my grandpa died when I was like second or third grade, right? My uncle died when I was like just getting out of high school. And, so my mom's side, I was like, man, like the men are dying pretty early. That's a little scary, So like, it was like the first moment I remember having in life where I was like, okay, like, yes, looking good and performing well is something that I will always care about. But really what I want to maximize is I want to maximize my ability with time on this earth, right? Like maximizing the time that I get to spend with people and live and how I feel and my energy day to day and my mood and my mindset. So that is obviously kind of where a lot of the gym and functional lifestyles kind of started for me, with just like how the model and how the programming and how the check-ins and how the intention of what I was trying to build for everyone else, but more importantly for myself, was like, okay, like how do I find kind of this balance, right? Like how do I still optimize on the longevity, but performance still look good, right? And I've always said that like someone that really improves performance is going to get a byproduct of looking good. Someone that tries to go to the gym to look good, they have to improve performance to actually still progressively overload to build that muscle. So like they all were like bi-directional in the aspect that like they influenced each other. But now that I'm 34 years old, doing blood work, getting back on Whoop, it just becomes more and more like prevalent to me of like, okay, the importance of like, what am I actually training for? Like, a lot of people, I mean, by the time you guys see this episode, it'll be a few weeks, probably, or a couple weeks, but like a lot of people, 2 weeks ago now from when you guys are listening to this, doing like the high race competition. And the coach is like, why aren't you going to do the competition with us? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just like not in the competitive mood as far as how my training is, right? Like I'm trying to find this balance between all of it. So the thing for me that really was the biggest change was like getting back on Whoop and realizing I'm like, man, my resting heart rate's just like not where I like it to be, right? My HRV is not where I like it to be, right? Then I got my blood work, and I would say, I think it was like 70, probably I would say 3/4 of all the biomarkers I got were in the optimal range. And then I would say another 20, maybe 15 to 20% were in a sufficient range. And then I had like 3 or 4 that were like out of range. And I was like, okay, like I want to make this a priority because I want everything to be in the optimal. I don't want to be just sufficient. I want to be optimal with everything, right? So how do I maximize that stuff? And, going down just the rabbit hole and just like reevaluating kind of what I'm and reflecting on what I'm doing, I was like, what I'm really just doing a shitty job at is I'm not prioritizing the health lifespan of my training. I'm just going through the motions in the gym. Performance is something that I don't want to say I've lost the drive for, but it's become less important to me. And I'm going to talk today on like what I think like the functional level of performance, the functional level of whatever it might be, for all these things today, because this will kind of make more sense on like how to tie them in, right? So let's start with aesthetics first. I think no matter who you are, at the end of the day, especially for people that go to the gym, looking good is such a big driver intrinsically for us and extrinsically, right? Because I think a lot of times, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that just work out because they want to be viewed as looking good to somebody else. We always talk about that. That's like kind of the inside joke that it's like generally people get in good shape when they're single, right? It's just like the natural evolutionary part of the brain of like, oh, I want to look good to attract a mate, right? But no matter what, I think a lot of times we want to look good to feel confident in ourselves, which is going to, just bleed into everything else in a good way. But also like, I think now it's like, okay, being married, it's like, I want to still have my wife find me attractive. I want to find myself attractive. So I think it's funny that like over the last, like really since the pandemic, but I would say like the last 2 or 4 years, I've noticed that there's kind of been this trend during my assessments with intake for new clients where it's like they're almost embarrassed to say, and I don't know why, right? But like they're almost embarrassed to say that is such an important part to their goal, right? Like, okay, aesthetics are really, really important to me. And I'm like, I don't know if it's just like, okay, it's an ego thing or whatever it might be for people. But at the end of the day, no matter who you are, aesthetics are always going to be important to us, right? It's just, it's very rare for people to hear that, like, I mean, put it this way. My 17-year career, I've never had anybody say that they don't want to look better. Like, oh yeah, I don't need to look any better. Like, I never heard anybody say I want to look worse. Most people don't want to stay where they are because that's obviously why they're sitting in front of me talking to me. But aesthetics are going to be a big part. And the one thing about aesthetics, when you think about how you view changing your training, is you need to optimize for what you're trying to improve and what you genetically are gifted with, what you have good kind of response to, so everyone's different. So for me, it's like, I've always had, like when I was thinking about men's physique competition, it's like I always had a good back. I always had good shoulders, but it's like my arms always needed work. My chest always needed work. My legs always needed work, like glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves, like everything. And it's like, it's important for us to double down on the things that we're kind of lacking or falling behind when you think about adding this symmetry. And I think the symmetry, or maybe even better way to say it, the look that you're trying to go for might be a little subjective, right? Like for me, I love kind of having this balanced look for how I look, right? I don't want to just be like all upper body and no legs, even though like genetically that's how my body was built. I always feel like I was built like a swimmer. So it's like, okay, I need to prioritize doing legs a couple times a week, right? I need to prioritize doing a little bit more horizontal push, maybe a couple times a week. And maybe I do shoulders twice or three times a month. Maybe I do back once a week instead. So how you view that is obviously going to be an important thing. Now, the performance side of it, I will say that I've kind of gotten to this place in life, and it might be a level of complacency. Maybe, however, as I say it out loud, I might answer the question for myself. But when I think about functional performance, there's this aspect that I ask myself a lot that's like, how much is enough, right? Like I think about that with money a lot, but I think about that obviously with performance. Like, why do I need to get faster? Why do I need to keep increasing my deadlift, right? Like, there's going to be a point in your training and your fitness career. For a lot of people, they have to get to a place to even think about maintenance or like what is going to be important. But one thing that I've noticed is like, when I was really consistent with training, I was seeing all these improvements. I was getting stronger. I was getting faster. I was building muscle. I was putting weight on. I was losing body fat. I was doing all these things. And then eventually I got to a point where I was like, that threshold of me continually starting to push more and more and more required me being more diligent on the back end of the recovery, right? Like I had to be really good with my sleep. I had to be more invested into my recovery protocols. I had to be better with the nutrition to support it. But also even just like what my body could handle when I started pushing that really, really high end weight or really high end intensity or volume, it started to come with repercussions of like me not feeling as good, right? Because your body is in this sympathetic drain of just like stressed out because your body's breaking down. So when you're training really, really hard for a very long time or high volume, you're catabolic. Your body is literally breaking down, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being catabolic, but we want to balance it out with these anabolic windows and kind of time frames of recovering. So you need to have the proper nutrition, right? You need to have the proper recovery. You need to have the proper sleep. You need to manage your stress correctly to be able to do so, at least over a long period of time. When you think about like some of the greatest that have played for a long time, you look at the Tom Brady's, you look at the LeBron James, right? Like these people that have been in like high-end performing athletes, they spend, I remember the article, I always talk about this, like how LeBron was spending over $1 million a year just on his recovery, right? So that's like, you think about his training, you think about the recovery protocols, his chiro, his massage person, his nutritionist, all those things, because he needs to be able to support such a high output. Now, for most of us listening to this, myself included, I'm not a professional athlete, right? I own a business. I have a job. I'm a husband. I'm a brother. I'm a friend. I want to look good. I want to be strong enough and fast enough to be, athletic enough to go play sports, right? Like I like to go play golf on the weekend, or if I want to go skimboarding, or if I want to go play a pickup game of anything, like I want to feel confident enough in my performance to be able to do so. But the idea of like, okay, I can deadlift twice my body weight. Cool. Do I need to have 2.5? Do I need to have 3? Like, I think the desire to chase more is always going to be something that inherently we're always driven towards. But the need for it, like I will say, like we were talking about this, I don't know who I was talking to, somebody in Palo Alto, and they're like, what's a good heart rate variability? And I'm like, the answer that I heard that, or kind of the response to this was like, what's a good deadlift? If I were to tell one of my clients what's a good deadlift, I'm like, if I could have my client deadlift their body weight, you're in a phenomenal place. Phenomenal. Like that is a very, very impressive feat. You were to talk about someone that works out more serious or a coach, you would say 2x, you would say 2.5x, you would say 3x. So like there's obviously levels to it, but I think like the functional need for it is like, what am I improving my performance for? Do I need to have a 3 times body weight deadlift or 2 times body weight for most people if I just want to be able to play pickleball or tennis on the weekends or go golf or go skiing in the wintertime? The answer is fuck no. And if anything, I think chasing that will actually sacrifice a little bit of the things that are going to be on how you feel, your energy levels, the amount of recovery that's needed, and just overall health span, right? Because you got to remember that in order to get to those levels, like it is a really, really intense period of breaking down and being catabolic. And unfortunately, most people kind of screw up like the recovery side, which is why it ends up leading to injury or leads to fatigue. It leads to burnout. So, and I think about kind of the same thing with speed. Like, yeah, it's nice to be fast, it's nice to be strong, it's nice to be mobile, but like, do I need to be able to do the splits to be considered good enough, right? And the answer is no, right? Do I need to be able to maybe hold a body weight squat if I'm like going to pull pans out of the bottom of my cupboards, or do I need to be able to reach overhead so I can put things away? Like, yeah, like that would be like a functional level of mobility. So I think when I say functional level of performance, I think the thing that I like to kind of ask, if you were to think about this for yourself, is like, what do you do and need and want in your life as far as day-to-day movements? What are the strength that you need? What's the mobility that you need? And what's the speed or aerobic capacity maybe that you need? Like whatever those performance metrics that you might be tracking, what is the functional level of desire? Because once you get to that functional level of desire, remember, you're going to have seasons in life. There's going to be seasons where you're like, you know what, fuck it. I want to put the gas pedal down. I really want to focus on performance. Or you know what, fuck it. I like where I'm at performance-wise. Let's really focus on optimizing the way I look. Or you know what, let's just really focus on like longevity health, whatever that might be. So I think that's an important question to have, but it's also important to remember that it is cyclical, because those seasons will create the level of changes that you have in the desire for a goal or a certain place or whatever that might be. So health is really what I want to talk about today, because this is like the biggest thing that I think, most people screw up, myself included, which is why I'm sharing today's episode with you guys. When you think about training for health, there needs to be a nice balance of all of it, right? Because when you look at like all these longevity metrics that are talked about, like, okay, like, yes, you need to have a good, like, I think the number one predictor is your VO2 max, right? How do I improve VO2 max? It's like for a man, it's like anywhere between 45 to 55 and plus is like really, really good VO2. I think for a woman, I want to say it's about 5 or 10 less, right? I don't know like what the actual metric of the reading is, but when you think about the number, if you're doing like a metabolic cart where they put the mask over you and you start just doing like a running test until you burn out, like to do a VO2 active test, that'd be the most accurate way to do it. But even things like Whoop and like there's other devices, obviously Garmin, things like that will start to give it based off their algorithm what your VO2 max is. It's not the most accurate, but it gives you kind of a general idea of where you're at. Then we look at things like grip strength, right? We look at things like mobility. We look at things like what are these longevity metrics that someone should pay attention to optimize for that. So for me, the biggest change came from like, okay, it's funny because I always say that I'm not a stressed out person. Like psychologically, I don't view myself as I don't have a stressful life. I have periods of stress. I have seasons where I'm like, okay, this is a little bit more, I'm a little busy. I'm a little overthinking because I'm planning to build something new or whatever it might be, right? I think some of the normal stuff that we go through, like I talked about a couple weeks ago of like, that like work and family tend to be the two bigger stressors. But like for most of us, some of us are either stuck there chronically or some of us go through it more cyclically like I do. And then I also looked at kind of like my resting heart rate, my HRV. My resting heart rate is probably like, I would say anywhere from 10, maybe upwards of 15, but like 10 to 12 higher than where it was like when I was in 2020. My HRV is almost cut in half from where I was in 2020. So I'm like kind of going through this reevaluation, looking at some of my data, and I'm like, what was the difference? Like, what was I doing back then? Like when I had the Whoop back on. And the biggest difference is I was running 3-4 times a week, maybe even 5 times a week. So I was doing a lot more aerobic work. I was doing a lot more running, obviously. I was on the bike a lot more. I was mountain biking a lot more. My training was always there. My training has always been super consistent for me, right? And for me personally, like I view my training as I would put aesthetics in front of performance for me personally. Like I'd rather look the way I want to look versus the need to be stronger or faster. But don't get me wrong, I like to go to the gym because you got to remember, if I improve my performance, that is the adaptation to build more muscle, right? If I improve my speed or improve my aerobic capacity, those are also the things that get your body more efficient at burning fat and losing weight. So those are bidirectional once again, but as far as the hierarchy for me, like I would go aesthetics then performance. But health is number one. So the thing that I changed was like, okay, I need to be doing more aerobic work. So I talked about this a few months ago, probably like how to structure your cardio correctly, but I want to kind of recap this because I think so many of us are still screwing this up. Aerobic work is when oxygen is present, right? So zone 2, a lot of people hear zone 2 training, right? Zone 2, you should be doing a minimum of 90 minutes a week, but upwards to 3 hours a week, right? So when you think about that, it's like an hour and a half to 3 hours a week of actual zone 2 work. And then we want to probably have anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a week of like zone 4, zone 5. So like your higher end type of threshold work, right? Zone 2 is aerobic, right? You should be able to have a conversation. You should be able to sing on this workout. You should be able to breathe through your nose only. It allows your body to be more efficient with the oxygen, right? It allows your body to be more efficient with, mitochondria efficiency and improving all those aspects. So yes, it's a huge chunk of aerobic capacity. Yes, it's going to help influence VO2 max with the combination of the zone 4, zone 5. Where most people screw this up is when you go on a run or a ride or a cardio workout, you start spending majority of your time in like a little bit of zone 2, mainly zone 3, a little bit of zone 4. You never really get zone 5, and you really don't capitalize on doing enough in zone 2. So for me, like 3 weeks ago, I said, okay, I need to be doing a lot more zone 2. I've really been completely shit at that. Like I'll do cardio, I'll do things that are hard, but I'm kind of doing it in that dead man zone. Like in the running world, it was always kind of known to me that it's like the zone 3 is your dead man zone. It's too intense and stressful where you don't get the zone 2 like aerobic benefit, right? But it's not intense enough where you really get the high-end threshold lactate work of getting into zone 4 and zone 5, right? So a lot of people, unfortunately, like in their workouts for conditioning, even at the gym or your high rocks workouts, your runs, your bikes, your triathlon workouts, whatever it might be, your sports, you kind of live a lot here. And it's just a good way for your body to not really get a lot of benefit, right? Like, sure, you're burning calories. So if you were to look at it objectively of like, am I burning calories? 100%. But when we think about, I want my body to be really, really efficient, right? Biologically, I want it to be really, really efficient and effective what I'm doing. I want it to burn more fat at rest, right? Zone 2 is obviously going to be more oxidizing fat. Even though you're not necessarily burning more calories overall, you're burning a higher percentage of fat calories. Zone 4, zone 5, you're going to work on lactate threshold, and that's where you're going to get a lot of those VO2 max benefits as well because you work on speed. You're going to work on power. So if you were to think about zone 2, like when I went on a run 3 weeks ago for the first time, I said, okay, I'm going to put my Whoop on. I always have it on. Sorry. I'm going to have the app on. I'm going to watch my heart rate the whole time. I breathe through my nose the entire time. I had to watch, and I'm not joking, my minutes per mile or mile per minute, whatever, was about 3 minutes higher than my normal runs, right? That's slower, right? Not faster. So it's a much slower pace, right? I did the Stairmaster earlier this week after a workout. That was much easier to regulate. A bike is a little bit easier to regulate. Runs, it's definitely harder. Rowing, I even find, rowing is kind of in between for me. But then I did another workout the following week, and I did only nose without the app, and then I spent like 40% of my time in zone 3. So it's like nasal breathing is not like a for sure. I always say it's like the easiest way to do it without tech, but even then, it's still easy to kind of get past that level, right? So when you want to spend about 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, we want to spend about 90 minutes to 3 hours a week in that zone. It's dedicated work that's aerobic, but it feels a lot easier than it should. Right? I think a lot of times we're trying to go shorter and try to feel a little bit more of an effort. Like that level of effort is that psychological win for us, right? Now, zone 4, zone 5, interesting fact for me, I've only hit zone 5. So for me, that's about 187 beats per minute, I think. It's either 185, 187. I've only hit it twice in the last 3 months. Twice I've only hit zone 5. I've hit zone 4 a handful of times, but right now I'm averaging like 15 minutes a week of zone 4 plus. Like I'm not doing enough effort on high intensity interval training. So maybe your Airdyne sprints, right? Maybe like 4 minutes of like 80 to 90% effort, 4 minutes easy, right? Or doing 10 to 20 rounds of 30 seconds max effort, 30 seconds easy. For me, the only 2 times I've got it is boxing with Billy, right? Like boxing has put me to a place where I'm like, like barely breathing. But that you want to have, like I said, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a week. It's not as much as total input. But if you were to look at that, the minimum effective dose for what we want overall is about 2 hours total minimum of saying 90 minutes coming from zone 2 and 30 minutes ideally coming from zone 4 and zone 5 combined, right? If you were to combine those two, that's where I'm getting the 2 hour mark, right? Upwards of 4 hours. So it's like we want to have 2 to 4 hours a week of dedicated cardiovascular training, right? If you want to improve your VO2 max, if you want to improve your cardiovascular metrics, you want to improve your blood pressure, you want to improve your cholesterol levels, you want to improve like lowering your resting heart rate. I think I might have touched on that. You improve your HRV. That needs to be dedicated cardiovascular training, right? And I know that some people are running for the performance of I want to be good for my training, my race, or some people are training for a high rocks competition or a fight. Some people are doing it because they want to lose a little weight. If you want to get the best of all 3 worlds, understand that zone 2 is going to feel so much easier than it should. Make that a staple, right? You need to be having minimum 2, but probably closer to 3 or 4 sessions a week that are dedicated towards that. Then once or twice a week or 2 to 3 times a week, you need to be doing some type of HIIT training, and that can be structured however you want. It's got to be really, really max intensity, and then it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of rest, right? So if I go 10 seconds max effort, maybe I go anywhere from 10 to 50 seconds of rest. So however you structure it, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, but doing things, right? So that could be hill sprints, that could be going boxing, that could be air dynes, it could be whatever you want it to be, but it's just got to be really, really, really intense. And we're missing the amount of, like, we're kind of lowering our threshold ability, right? We want to be able to handle more lactate and kind of be more efficient with that. We want to be able to improve speed and power from the performance side. But also, most importantly, we want to improve VO2 max, and that's the benefit that you're going to get from having that zone 4, zone 5. So, in the last little piece that I want to touch on too is I think really never underestimating, like today I'm going to do one of those just because for me, I'm trying to at least have maybe 1 day a week where I'm kind of like, I'm just going to work on body weight and mobility only, right? So it's like a day of foam rolling, day of like release, day of kind of like isometrics, and just body weight stuff. So it's not as intense necessarily from like a muscular load, maybe. It's not going to be the best thing to quote unquote improve my performance, even though indirectly it kind of does obviously help a lot. But more importantly, it's going to allow me to kind of improve, getting into more parasympathetic states, not making all my workouts just like kill yourself type of thing. Because you need to find the balancing act between those two things. Zone 2 should be easy and restorative. Like you should feel better after zone 2. Zone 4, zone 5, you should feel like you want to cry yourself on the way home. So like there's obviously a balancing act for all those things, strength training being the same thing. But when I think about this longevity health side of it, it's like I also want to have good mobility. I don't want to be in pain, right? And if you're only training and only doing strength work, unfortunately, it's going to lead to that eventually. So balancing out with like being really, really good with relative strength. Make your body weight training a bigger priority. Too many of us just prioritize weights, barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, cable machines, whatever the tool might be. Great. It's obviously the most optimal way to build the most amount of muscle the quickest. But I also, from a stability perspective, a mobility perspective, and the most important thing, learning how to control your own body weight. Like when we think about all these people that get older in life and they fall down, they trip, and they don't have any control or strength to be able to do those things to prevent injuries or even sometimes even get themselves up off the ground, that is a big part of it. That's why like the grip strength is talked about a lot in the longevity space, is like that is going to be generally correlative with all-cause mortality, right? So having that strength, but I think more importantly, like prioritizing the strength that you have relatively with yourself. But the mobility part, right? Like, we are going to, with training and running and anything intense long enough, you're going to create little adhesions, little compensations, things like that. So prioritizing, kind of balancing those things out, I think, with your training too. So to tie that all in, we all want to look good. Yes, the diet and the lifestyle is a huge part of this, right? But the stimulus to build muscle and the stimulus to lose body fat and the stimulus to lose weight by burning calories has to come from training, right? Performance is good. I think performance, depending on who's listening to this, you're an athlete, you can ignore what I said because your job is to be the best at your sport. But remember that when you retire or you eventually make that less of a priority in life, you're going to need to find some level of balance. And that functional level is, what do you need for your daily life, right? What is that threshold that you think is going to make you better at going snowboarding or skiing, or is going to make you better with golf or tennis, or it's just going to make you feel better by just having better strength and posture? So find the balance of that. But then the most important thing from a health perspective is prioritize the mobility, prioritize the body weight, but most importantly, stop sleeping on how you're treating your cardiovascular training. More people than not are fucking this up. You're not doing enough of zone 2. You're doing way too much zone 3. And you're also not doing things that are even or intense enough to get into the zone 5 or zone 4 more often. So finding the balance act, I think, is going to be the best thing from your hormones, your biology, your looks, your feeling, your levels of stress. And that, I think, for most of us, when we think about the number one goal of feeling better, is when you find kind of the sweet balance of all those things, right? So hope you guys got some good nuggets for that one. You can take some home. And I will see you guys next week.